Hey guys, what's up? Ehren here, Question Period Canada. Things are getting hot on the Hill, guys. I've noticed that since the Nazi scandal, that the relationships between the Liberals and the Conservatives are more strained than they've ever been. They're going hard on each other in Question Period. It's really entertaining to watch. It's been a lot of fun. So we're gonna jump right into it for today, and should be a pretty crazy episode, I think. Check it out.
Questions are
Oral question.
the honourable member, the honourable leader of the opposition.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, the Prime Minister has finally admitted that he's not worth it. After how many years? Well, the carbon tax has done nothing for the environment, and it actually hampers families. Just minutes before I was going to host a big gathering in a Liberal riding to cut the carbon tax, the Prime Minister flip-flopped, but he didn't eliminate the second carbon tax that applies to Quebec with the support of the Bloc. We'll be consistent and eliminate the second carbon tax for the Quebecers and all Canadians. The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to remind the Leader of the Opposition that we have been consistent. But I'd also like to remind him that today, as climate change hits Canadians and people across the planet, a party that wants to be a responsible government has to take account of climate change and help with affordability. And in terms of the Conservatives, there's nothing there. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Knew that this Prime Minister
let's get
was
going.
not
Let's get
worth
going.
the cost. We just didn't realize he would admit it himself, but here's what it took. I was moments away from holding a massive 1,000-person rally of common sense Nova Scotians to axe the tax. The Prime Minister heard the news. He was huddled up in a ball in the fetal position, sweating bullets as Liberal MPs pounded on his office door, asking for some relief. But only some relief came, Mr. Speaker, not for everyone everywhere. Will I need to hold massive axe the tax rallies in every Liberal riding to finally do away with it?
Greg is up to his old tricks, shutting everything down. Imagine.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government has developed and will be rolling out a plan to deploy heat pumps, free heat pumps in Atlantic Canada and across the country. It will address affordability issues, put more money back in the pockets of Canadians, and actually help us to address climate change, something that the opposition members seem to ignore on an ongoing basis.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Admitted that he's not worth the cost by announcing that he would pause his carbon tax for some people on some fuels for some period of time. And then his Rural Affairs Minister said that other Canadians could have had the same pause, but for the fact that they didn't elect Liberals. Apparently we're going to have different tax rates in different constituencies depending on how people vote.
That won't work.
Why is it, Mr. Speaker, that the Liberal MPs in Thunder Bay, North Bay, Sudbury, Sault Ste. Marie, other freezing cold communities are not getting the same break? Is it because their local Liberal MP is utterly useless?
Whoa, that's a lot to say. Utterly useless. Boy, oh boy. Greg won't like that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Folks in this House.
Look at him up there. He's shaking his finger. You see it?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly it is very important that we are addressing both affordability concerns and fighting climate change across this country. The heat pump program, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, if he'd done his homework, would know applies across the country. It actually will help to ensure that we are reducing the costs of home heating, oil heating in every province and territory while continuing to address climate change in a thoughtful way.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
That is hot air in cold weather. Just today, the snow started following in cold Ottawa. Edmonton's also cold. It has Liberal MPs. Winnipeg, they call it Winterpeg for a reason. People there are forced to pay tax on natural gas. All these cities have Liberal MPs. The Prime Minister claims that he only backed down on the carbon tax for some Canadians because of the advocacy of terrified Liberal members. So is he really saying that Liberal MPs in the areas where this pause does not apply are totally useless and will never be able to defend Canadians heating their homes?
He's going hard
Thank
today,
you, Mr.
right?
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the
Karina.
leader of the opposition knows that Canadians who live in jurisdictions where the price on pollution applies get over $1,000 a year from the Government of Canada to fight climate change. When it comes to the Conservatives, they want to take that $1,000 out of the pockets of Canadians, Mr. Speaker. Our climate policy has resulted in 53 megatons being removed. That's the equivalent of 11 million cars a year. Mr. Speaker, while they keep their heads in the sand and pretend that climate change isn't real, we're going to fight climate change and we're going to help Canadians with affordability. Thank you.
Heads in the sand, I guess.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Federal Affairs
All right,
Minister
here's
says
gonna
that
go.
if Canadians want a pause from the carbon tax, they need to elect a local Liberal MP. She's got it exactly wrong. What they need to do is elect a common-sense Conservative government that will axe the tax entirely. This is not only hurting the pocketbook of Canadians or forcing seniors to choose between eating and heating. Now, Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC, and Ontario are asking for similar breaks. In fact, the Saskatchewan government is refusing to collect the tax on the utility. Does the Prime Minister realize that he is not only bankrupting Canadians and leaving them in the cold, he's actually dividing our country?
It's a good one.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, look, as a resident of Ontario, I remember the last time that a province elected a common-sense Conservative government, Mr. Speaker. Look what they did to education. Look how they gutted healthcare. Look what happened with Walkerton, Mr. Speaker.
She's
We
going.
know
She's
as
getting
Canadians
revved up.
What happens when you elect
Even Karina
common-sense
Gould.
Conservatives? They gut programs, they hurt Canadians, and they're certainly not there when it comes to fighting climate change or supporting Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
She must have heard that I was calling her a boring clown, because the last couple of days, like everybody else, seems to be more agitated than usual.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, literally, tens of thousands of companies say that they are in danger in the wake of the CIBA program. The pandemic hurt them, of course. Inflation is hurting them. Interest rates are hurting them. Consumer perspectives in Quebec and Canada also are hurting them. We have asked for an agreement with banks to have a credible solution for these companies. Is the government ready to take action?
What do you guys think about the Bloc Québécois in the federal government? What do you think of that?
The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, our government and all we're listening to small companies. Small businesses have asked for our help, and that is why our government has extended the deadline for CIBA until January 18th, 2024. We also announced for extension of 1 year for reimbursement until the end of 2026. Our government is always there for small businesses. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. We're talking about real companies, real entrepreneurs, real jobs. We're talking about a real economic impact in Canada and in Quebec. Everyone in all provinces is saying that the current deadlines and delays are not enough. Companies are at the risk of closing their doors. We're just hearing fantasies here. We're talking about real jobs and real companies, and this is almost nothing. They need a hand.
Can't let all the small
The
companies
Honourable
go
Minister.
to business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When we're talking about CIBA in Canada, it's
She's
an
a member of
account
the
we established
WEF.
to help companies and organizations throughout the pandemic. We delayed the reimbursement till the end of 2023. There's a portion that is non-refundable, and then we also extended it by another couple of weeks so that companies could make some adjustments and benefit from that non-refundable portion. But we can't scare organizations and companies for nothing. The honourable member for Burnaby South.
On
Jag
home
meat.
heating
What do you
only
think of Jag
benefits
meat?
Canadians that live where Liberals need to save their seats. All Canadians need some relief when it comes to the cost of home heating. That's why New Democrats propose taking the GST off of all home heating. All Canadians. But it's a measure that Liberals and Conservatives have both opposed. So when will the Liberals stop playing games and bring in relief for all Canadians this cold winter?
The honourable minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I would just say that folks in the chamber need to do their homework. This program actually applies across the country. The rebate applies, the doubling of the rural top-up applies across the country. The heat pump program applies across the country. It applies to all folks who are actually challenged by the cost right now of home heating oil.
Do you have a heating pump where you live?
Burnaby South.
Doug Ford
I'm still
et
on
les
oil.
Greenbelts sont l'exemple.
Doug Ford and the Greenbelt are the perfect example of the Conservative strategy on housing. They sell interest to their rich promoter friends.
This
And
is
the
true.
Liberals, after 8 years, have not done better. Record rent prices, rent evictions. The worst record in the G7. It benefits those who are profiting from the crisis, not those who are facing it. We need to build. What is the government doing to build not-for-profit housing? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to remind my honourable colleague that I am opposed to what the Ford government was trying to do in the GTA. And the Conservatives did support this. We are in favour of environmental protection across the country. In the last month, we signed agreements with the Northwest Territories, Nunavut, and Nova Scotia to protect 1,000 square meters of territory across the country. That's 4 times the size of the Great Britain, and we still have much work to do. The honourable
That
member for
math didn't
Thornhill.
seem
Liberal
right.
NDP government
Melissa
is
Lanceman's
finally
really
saying
fun.
the quiet part out loud. They admitted that their carbon tax makes life more unaffordable and does nothing to help the environment. But only certain people get relief. Those who happen to live in places where Liberal polling numbers are the worst. Everyone else gets told that their vote doesn't matter and that they don't care. If the Liberals can take the carbon tax off for some Canadians, why can't they take it off for all Canadians?
Get rid of the carbon tax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've said a number of times, this program applies across the country in every province and territory of this country. We have developed a solution with respect to home heating oil that will put more money back into the pockets of Canadians. It will continue to fight and reduce emissions. It will address both the climate issue and challenges with respect to affordability.
The honourable member from Thornhill.
Kind of like
Minister
Jonathan
can
Wilkinson,
rely on
but
his
he's boring.
prepared talking points all he wants, but that wasn't quite how the Minister for Rural Economic Development spun it yesterday. She told Canadians that if they wanted to be exempted from Liberal carbon taxes, they had to, wait for it, vote Liberal. My neighbours in the GTA have a
surprise.
question then for the Minister. They have 24 Liberal MPs in Toronto, 11 in Peel, 7 in York, 10 of them are cabinet ministers. If this is the largest concentration of Liberal ridings in Canada, then why are they still paying a carbon tax?
Greg's going to try to keep it under control. Watch him on the chair. Look at him. Just standing there. What do you think of Greg Fergus, guys? Look, hitting this button.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker,
Clown.
home heating oil is a challenge not just for Atlantic Canadians, but for many in rural Canada. That has been the case for many years, but became more forceful in the last couple of years as the price of home heating oil skyrocketed, went up 75% in 2022. What I would say is we've come up with a solution that actually will enable Canadians to do the right thing with respect to fighting climate change. We'll actually put more money in their pockets. It is a good solution for the climate. It is a good solution for the affordability of Canadians in Atlantic Canada and everywhere across this country.
I don't know. Think that's good? I don't think so.
The Honourable Member for Dufferin.
Has finally admitted the carbon tax makes heating your home more expensive, and he's pausing the carbon tax in Atlantic Canada. And we know why, because the Minister for Long Range Mountains said Atlantic MPs forced the Prime Minister to do it. So actually what the Prime Minister is saying after 8 years is that if you're a Liberal MP from Brampton, Toronto, Mississauga, or Thunder Bay, your voice doesn't matter at all. You can't have any change. They are effectively useless. So will the Prime Minister stop playing politics with the carbon tax and just axe it?
Just axe it. Get rid of it. I don't think it's a good strategy for reducing damage to the environment.
The Honourable Minister.
A tax on it doesn't make sense.
As a member of Parliament from Ontario, I know that Ontario families get over $1,000 a year for fighting pollution, Mr. Speaker. I guess that Ontario MP wants to take that $1,000 right out of their pockets, Mr. Speaker. That's exactly what he's advocating for. Instead, our government is committed to making sure that we help Canadians not just fight pollution, not just fight climate change, but also deal with affordability. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
She is upping her game. Great.
The Honourable Member for Dufferin-Caledon.
Now we've just been treated to the great carbon tax fable. First, it was revenue neutral. Second, you get more money than you pay into it. Third, it fights climate change. It does none of those things, Mr. Speaker. Right. What it does, and what the Prime Minister has admitted by pausing the carbon tax, is it makes it more expensive for everyone. The real tragedy is for MPs, is for Canadians outside of Atlantic Canada. Why? It's not being paused. And no, most people heat their homes in Ontario, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, BC, and Quebec, not with heating oil. It doesn't apply across the country. Will they stop playing politics, picking winners and looters, dividing Canadians, and axe the tax?
It's good. This guy, Greg Fergus, holy moly. Look at him up there.
Colleagues.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to correct a record. When we came into power in 2015, projections in emission growth in Canada were going that in 2030 we would be 80 million tons above our 2005 levels. We took that out of the atmosphere, Mr. Speaker, and we've reduced emissions by another 50 million tons. That's the equivalent of removing from our roads more than 20 million vehicles, Mr. Speaker. That's one of the things that we've done in the last 8 years. We've done so many more things to fight climate change. We have the best record of all G7 countries, something that never happened, not once, under the Conservative Party for 10 years, Mr. Speaker.
That's interesting.
Before I give the floor to the Honourable Member, I'd just like to encourage all members to wait your turn to speak until you're recognized by the Chair. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-en-Saint-Charles.
It's just annoying.
Mr. Speaker, last Thursday, the Prime Minister looked at the polls and panicked. And what did he do? He paused the carbon tax in Atlantic Canada. And yesterday, his Environment Minister said in an interview that he wasn't even prepared to help Canadians in his own province. And this is humiliating for Quebecers who also pay the carbon tax. Quebecers also have to eat and pay for gas. Will the Prime Minister announce the complete, not just temporary, withdrawal of the second carbon tax that applies to Quebec? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I would ask my honourable colleague to go back and listen to the show on Radio Canada, and I'm happy he does listen to it because we do fund CBC and Radio Canada. But what I said was that all the measures that we have put in place in terms of dental care, daycares, and the fight against climate change are all measures that the Conservative Party of Canada is opposed. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Like the tax, I didn't just listen to the show once, twice, but 3 times, and that's wrong. The minister even said that as long as he will be Minister of the Environment, he will not make any other modifications to the tax in Canada. He confirmed that there will be no changes as he's in place. So what is the Prime Minister going to do with that? But right now, the Bloc is supporting the carbon tax, and they say it doesn't apply to Quebec. And at the same time, they want to radically increase it. At the end of the day, what is this government doing? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think if he listened to the show once, twice, or 3 times, he would have practiced this question once, twice, or 3 times. Yes, there is a carbon price in place across the country. And yes, we make sure that there will be a mechanism that will be fair for all Canadians, and we support Canadians in the fight against climate change, and also in terms of affordability. The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Mr. Speaker, the federal government cannot let 250,000 companies go bankrupt without trying to save them. Everyone is asking it to defer repayment of CIBA loans for another year without loss of the subsidy. All the premiers of Quebec and the provinces, the National Assembly of Quebec is unanimous, as is the Fédération de l'Entreprise Indépendante and the Restaurant Association. It's unanimous. Federal inaction is leading us toward a wave of bankruptcies. When will the government finally offer SMEs an adequate deferral of repayment? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker. Nearly 900,000 companies would have closed their doors during the pandemic. What did we do? We created the CIBA account to help small businesses stay open. And what are we doing? We're offering them additional flexibility so they can pay their loans. And what is our government continuing to do? We're continuing to help small businesses across the country and to support them, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Mr. Speaker, let's talk about federal flexibility. Companies had until December 31st to repay CIBA without losing the subsidy that saved them from bankruptcy. And do you know how much more time Ottawa gave them? 18 days. The Liberals are giving 18 days to companies that have been struggling for 3 years to pay off their pandemic debts, and they call that flexibility. Mr. Speaker, the survival of 250,000 businesses is at stake. When will we see a real deferral of payment? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. CIBA in Canada was offered during the COVID pandemic. We're talking about no interest loans for a 2-year period or more, depending on the date, and with a portion that may be non-refundable if reimbursement is done before the deadline. We could also extend the deadline without having to pay back the loan at the beginning of next year. You can extend the reimbursement till the end of next year. The Honourable Member for Mirabel. Mr. Speaker, it's not true that the government is flexible. It's not true either that it's financially responsible. If it were, it would do everything to avoid the bankruptcy of 250,000 companies. If it were responsible, it would understand that companies pay back faster when they're staying alive rather than going bankrupt. And if it were responsible, they'd know that the employees of these companies are far more profitable on the job than on EI. And if they were responsible, they would defer payments again, then evaluate each company file and offer personalized solutions. That is what is financial responsible. Can they give it a try? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to be there for small companies. We did grant small companies a prolongation of repayment until this year. when they did ask for more support, we offered them greater financing flexibility and more time with a 1-year extension of the deadline for reimbursement. Thank you.
President.
The honourable member for Foothills.
Must be in the air because the Prime Minister has announced his re-election campaign. Vote Liberal in 3 years, we're going to quadruple the carbon tax on home heating, gas and groceries. After 8 years, this Prime Minister is in a panic mode because he knows his NDP Liberal government isn't worth the cost. And now we have a Liberal minister from Long Range Mountains, Newfoundland, Labrador, admitting that only Canadians who vote Liberal will get an exemption from the carbon tax. Well, what about the Liberal minister from Edmonton Centre or the Liberal MP from Calgary Skyview? Were these MPs so incompetent and so out of touch they couldn't secure an exemption on the carbon tax for Albertans?
No exemption in Alberta.
The Honourable Minister.
We know that carbon pricing works. It both reduces emissions and puts more money in the pockets of middle-class families. We made a decision to attack a highly polluting source of fuel, home heating oil, in a different way so we can get rid of it faster. Mr. Speaker, we're doing this by making a record investment in heat pump technology, which is not only going to reduce emissions at a household level, it's going to save families thousands of dollars every year. This is sensible policy. It's good for the environment, it's good for the economy, and it's good for the households, not just in my riding, but right across the country.
Hear, hear.
Can't keep those hands still. I know the feeling.
The carbon tax works only if it's politically expedient. The Prime Minister's carbon tax exemption doesn't help 97% of Canadians who are already struggling to put food on the table and heat their homes. Now we have a Liberal minister from Newfoundland, Labrador, telling Albertans that the only reason you're not getting an exemption is you didn't vote Liberal. So is the Liberal minister from Edmonton Centre and the Calgary Liberal MP from Skyview not defending Alberta families? Were they not defending their own 81% of their constituents who rely on natural gas to heat their homes will not get a carbon tax exemption? Will these Liberal MPs from Alberta stand in this House, defend their constituents, and admit their Prime Minister is not worth the cost?
Going hard today. Greg, come on. Look at him on his button.
Mr. Speaker, well, I guess that member didn't hear the minister earlier when he said that home heating oil was exempted right across the country. Furthermore, for his constituents in Alberta, they're getting over $1,000 a year in a climate rebate to help fight climate change. But if that member and any other member from Alberta really wants to stand up for Canadians, why don't they stand up to Premier Danielle Smith as they're trying to gut their pensions, Mr. Speaker? On this side of the House, we're going to stand for Canadians right across this country when it comes to their pensions, when it comes to affordability, and it fights to climate change. They're reckless and they're not worth the risk. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Karina Gould must have changed her diet or something. She seems to have a lot more energy.
Seek the cooperation of all members, please, to keep your comments so that the Speaker can hear the questions, but also so that the person who would ask the questions can certainly hear the response. The honourable member from Peace River, Prince George, Northern Rockies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 8 years, this desperate Prime Minister in total freefall finally admitted that his carbon tax is punishing Canadians. The Prime Minister also announced in his re-election platform that to vote Liberal in Yukon means quadrupling the carbon tax on home heating. And this weekend, the minister from Newfoundland admitted the exemption didn't apply to all Canadians across the country, including all Yukoners. My question is for the Liberal Member of Parliament for Yukon. Will he step up and stand up to this Prime Minister and demand that the carbon tax be permanently removed for all Yukoners?
Get rid of it right across the board.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've said a number of times, this program and the heat pump program actually applies in every province and territory across this country. But I would also suggest that, yes, disproportionately there are more heat pumps and more heating oil in Atlantic Canada. We actually are focused on ensuring we are addressing pressing needs in every part of the country, including providing significant funding for abandoned oil and gas wells in Alberta and British Columbia.
His delivery has much to be desired. He speaks well, he doesn't use paper very often, but it's
Mr.
boring
Speaker,
still.
Canadians right across this country are struggling with the cost of home heating, and Canadians right across this country want to be part of fighting climate change. Yet, while this government sweetened the heat pump rebate for Atlantic Canada, the rest of Canadians are stuck with a lengthy bureaucratic application process that only gets them 1/3 of that dollar amount. It does seem, Mr. Speaker, like these Liberals care more about rural Canada when they hold seats there than they do about helping everyone across this country. So will the minister stand today and commit to increasing the federal heat pump rebate for all Canadians?
L'honorable ministre.
Again, Mr. Speaker, it is important that folks actually do their homework. There is an existing heat pump program across this country that provides grants of $10,000. It actually enables people to get a check within 3 days. It applies just as much in British Columbia as it does in Newfoundland and Labrador. Last week, we announced we were increasing that by another $5,000 so long as provinces actually step up to be part of the solution. So, yes, the answer is yes.
He must have heard us talking about him because he brought a lot more energy that time. It's funny.
L'honorable député de Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Mr. Speaker, today Air Canada announced obscene quarterly profits of $1.2 billion. At the same time, another passenger was forced to drag themselves off an Air Canada flight because the necessary wheelchair and staff weren't in place. It's degrading and a violation of human rights. Under the Liberals' watch, Air Canada has been allowed to mistreat Canadians while making billions in profits. When is the minister going to do their job and make sure travelers with disabilities never face discrimination again?
L'honorable ministre des Transports.
Mr. Speaker, I was horrified to learn how Rodney Hodgins was treated by Air Canada. Like every Canadian, Mr. Hodgins deserves to be treated with dignity and with respect. My office called Air Canada, they're investigating, and Air Canada apologized to Mr. Hodgins. That's the very, very least they can do. Persons with disabilities deserve equal rights and access when traveling. Canadians expect Air Canada to do better, much, much better.
Air Canada, hey?
Député de Saint-Léonard, Saint-Michel.
Mr. Speaker, last week members of this House voted on my private member's bill C-252, which aims to prohibit the marketing of unhealthy foods and beverages to children aged 13 and under. While the Bloc and the NDP voted in favor of this initiative to protect the health of children, the Conservatives voted against it, once again demonstrating that the health of Canadians is always their last priority. To the Minister of Health, can you please speak to the importance of the Child Health Protection Act?
L'honorable ministre de
Hear
la
about
Santé.
this.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member for Saint Leonard, Saint Michel, for championing children's health. And you know, when we take a look at the absolute unfortunate tsunami of chronic disease and illness that is coming as a result of childhood nutrition not being where it needs to be, we know one of those leading problems is advertisers going after children to push, unfortunately, unhealthy products. They're going to have injurious effects on their health. I'm so proud of this House that we took action. I'm so proud of this member for introducing this private member's bill. I'm utterly confounded as to why the Conservatives would stand against it. It's imperative we do everything we can for children's health.
Mark's confounded.
L'honorable député de
Every time.
An obvious, desperate Prime Minister admitted his carbon tax is punishing Canadians and making life unaffordable. After 8 years, he finally proved to himself last Thursday that he's not worth the cost. And his only strategy at this point is not about climate, it's about protecting his Liberal MPs. In Sudbury Nickel Belt, 55% of homes are heated by natural gas. Yet for these struggling Canadians, they get no exemption from heating their homes. Now, the Leader of the Opposition has proposed to axe the tax in all forms of home heating for every Canadian. Will the Prime Minister agree with that?
Hope so. Hope so.
L'honorable ministre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier I spoke about our record in terms of greenhouse gas reduction, which, no thanks to the Conservative Party, we've been able to do, Mr. Speaker, over the last few years. But let's talk about the record level number of electric vehicles that are being deployed. 10% of sales now in Canada are electric vehicles, something the Leader of the Opposition doesn't even believe in. He thinks it's a myth. Whereas 10 years ago, 1 in 25 vehicles sold in the world was electric. Today, it's 1 in 5 around the world, Mr. Speaker. We're catching up to the rest of the world, no thanks to the Conservative Party of Canada.
L'honorable député de Renfrew-Nipissing, Pembroke.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 long years, this NDP Liberal government is so arrogant that it doesn't even try to hide its corruption. The Minister for Long Range Mountain openly admitted that Canadians who don't vote for Liberals will be punished with higher taxes. She insulted Canadians and gave a slap in the face to her coalition partners. What about the NDP MP for Timmins James Bay? Can the minister tell us why the NDP partners are so incompetent and ineffective they couldn't get a tax break on home heating for people suffering in Northern Ontario?
Great job. L'honorable ministre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is important to address affordability. That is exactly what we are doing with the heat pump program, to ensure that people are actually saving money. It's also important that we actually are fighting climate change in a thoughtful and substantive way. I do find this question a little bit odd coming from the only member in the House of Commons who voted against the Paris Agreement.
Certain members would like to listen to the question which is being asked by the honourable member. If I could ask for your attention, the honourable member from Renfrew and Nipissing, Pembroke.
And Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister once said a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. After 8 long years, now he says some Canadians are more equal than other Canadians. The NDP Liberal government is so desperate to cling on to power, they will pay any price. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost of national unity. Will the Liberals introduce legislation today, listening to the Leader of the Opposition, and axe the tax on all home heating for all Canadians?
Good. That's great. She doesn't get up to speak very often.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure how many times I need to repeat in this House that the program applies to all Canadians, all provinces and territories across the country. We are addressing a particularly acute issue with respect to home heating. Most folks in this chamber should be aware that this has been an issue for a number of years. We are doing that by accelerating the deployment of heat pumps that will save people money and will continue to help us to address climate change. That is a responsible, thoughtful way to approach public policy.
The honourable member from Dauphin Swan River, Nipawa.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. The Prime Minister finally admitted that his carbon tax is unaffordable for Canadians. But instead of removing the carbon tax for all Canadians, the Prime Minister chose to further divide this country by only helping those who voted for it. The Liberals are saying the Manitobans didn't deserve the tax relief because they didn't vote Liberal. Unfortunately, Manitoba elected 4 Liberals. Why did the Manitoba Liberal Minister from St. Boniface, St. Vital fail to get a carbon tax exemption on home heating for Manitoba?
Gets cold in Manitoba too, right?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, the member opposite clearly wasn't listening to the minister when he said that home heating oil exemptions apply right across the country. But Mr. Speaker, what's more is that folks in Manitoba get a rebate from the price on pollution. So not only are we helping Canadians to fight climate change, which I remind my colleagues is an existential threat to our well-being, we are also helping them with the high cost of living. So instead of taking their money away, Mr. Speaker, they should be joining us in ensuring that we can all provide more supports to Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I think we've got a few on existential concerns.
Mr. Speaker, our farmers continue to suffer from the catastrophic weather in July. In a survey, the UPA revealed that the rains had ravaged no less than 60% of Quebec's market garden acreage. Respondents lost a third of their turnover in the midst of an inflation crisis. Worse still, more than half of producers believe that this damage will also have an impact on the harvest of 2024. Mr. Speaker, what is needed is 1. Emergency aid for horticultural producers, and 2. A one-year postponement of the repayment of the emergency account. When is the government finally going to act? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, our thoughts are for all those in this country that have been affected by catastrophic weather, forest fires, for example. Producers and farmers are on the front line against climate change. We know that devastation imposed by extreme weather events and forest fires throughout the country have made these times very difficult for many of these people, and we will continue to be here for them. We'll continue to work together so that we can make sure that we meet their needs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Mr. Speaker, the Minister doesn't seem to understand the urgency of the situation. Among root vegetable growers, 64% of land has been ravaged by rain. For strawberries and raspberries, the figure is 73%. For pea growers, it's 88%. That, Mr. Speaker, will have an impact on food prices if the government does not intervene. Everyone is affected by this. Mr. Speaker, we need emergency aid. We need a one-year postponement of the repayment of the emergency account, and we're also running out of time. When will the Minister finally understand? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to remind my colleague that we unveiled our first national strategy to fight climate change, a strategy that was positively sanctioned by a government office that said it was brave and courageous. We are working with farmers and producers and other partners, provinces, territories and municipalities, for example, to prepare Canada and its population and its businesses to face climate change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Échemins-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, Quebec has been hit by the second carbon tax, and the consequences for the lives of our fellow citizens are catastrophic. Our food banks are overwhelmed, like Frigo Plein, Le Grenier, and L'Essentiel in my riding. 1 in 10 people use food counters and food banks. After 8 years of this government, helped by the Bloc Québécois, nothing works anymore. It costs a lot to vote Bloc. Friday's announcement by the Prime Minister is not enough. He must abolish all taxes everywhere. When will the Prime Minister finally announce his complete withdrawal of this carbon tax?
Sounds like everybody's on the same side. They want to get rid of the carbon tax.
The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, it's always rather difficult for me to stand up after this member because for many years she was part of the first North American government that put a price on carbon. She was part of the government at the time. I would like to quote an article from La Presse this morning. In Quebec, 265 millimeters of precipitation fell, a record that had never been seen since 1940. The impact of climate change exists especially in agriculture. It increases the cost of food. In agriculture in Quebec, $150,000 million of damages. Everyone pays for this, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Échemins-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this Bloc Québécois-supported government, parents are simply fed up. They have to cut back on absolutely everything, including their own children's needs. I don't understand why they're laughing on the other side, because there's nothing funny in what I'm saying. One family in Lévis says they have to pay almost twice as much for food because of inflation. It's expensive to vote for the Bloc Québécois, which wants to radically increase the carbon tax. The second carbon tax is being applied in Quebec and is hurting everyone. When will the Prime Minister finally abandon his carbon tax from coast to coast to coast, Mr. Speaker?
It's a pretty funny face, and she's so intense, she finishes her look, her stare, her glare.
The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I find it hard to follow the logic of my Conservative colleague because she was there at the time when carbon pricing was initiated. She voted for it. She was part of the cabinet. So my question to my colleague is, does she just change her mind every time she changes leader or every time she changes party?
Oh, good one. Pablo dropped a zinger there. She's changed parties.
We would love to hear the next question. I would like to encourage all members to listen to the Honourable Member Louis Saint-Laurent with his question. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You'll note that the Bloc Québécois supported the Liberals
Gerard
once again.
Detel
Mr.
is
Speaker,
intense. Watch him go.
Close to 900,000 Quebecers go to food banks now. After 8 years of Liberal governance, that is the situation. What they want to do is create a new tax with the enthusiastic support of the Bloc Québécois, who want to radically increase the price of carbon. The Prime Minister, who is flailing in polls, says that he will give a temporary tax break for people in the Atlantic provinces. What about the rest of the country, Mr. Speaker?
He'll get up again. I bet you he's going to flip out next time. I hope. Look at Greg. He's up there playing with his button.
The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to tell my colleagues that there is a price on pollution. Pollution is expensive. The measures we have implemented, Mr. Speaker, will allow us to improve and accelerate our fight against climate change. We have tangible projects put forward to bring money back into the pockets of our taxpayers. Our plan is flexible, contrary to what the Conservatives have to say. They should be ashamed of their desire to pollute even more.
She can be fun sometimes. She speaks French very often, but she had an interesting poppy, too. Did you see her poppy?
The Honourable Member for Pontiac. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before becoming a Member of Parliament, I had the opportunity to travel to several countries without a functioning tax system. Seniors, youth, unemployed people who are just left to fend for themselves. I saw them in the street, Mr. Speaker. I know that Conservatives would love to axe our tax system, but we won't step down, we won't back down. How does the CRA help countries develop their tax systems rather than axe tax systems like the Conservatives would like to do?
That was a bit of a confusing question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The CRA shares its expertise and savoir-faire with many countries and developing countries in various ways. We support tax inspectors by providing experienced tax auditors. We welcome technical delegations who visit us, and we take part in 2 OECD forums. The Commissioner presides over one of these forums. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
She doesn't look like a WEF member, but she is. World Economic Forum.
After 8 years, the plummeting, panicking Prime Minister admitted his carbon tax is punishing Canadians and making life more unaffordable. Liberals just announced their re-election platform, vote Liberal, and quadruple the carbon tax on home heating oil after the next election. The Liberal minister from Newfoundland admitted this exemption wasn't granted to Canadians across the country because they don't vote Liberal. Rum bottle politics is back.
Rum bottle politics is back.
With the Band-Aids and cure the problem he caused and axe the carbon tax.
Good line. Good line. Rum bottle politics.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member asked us to cure the problem. The problem that we're trying to cure is pollution from home heating oil. Mr. Speaker, by making the investments necessary, we can replace home heating oil furnaces with heat pumps. They are cleaner, they create jobs in our communities, and they save thousands of dollars every year for families who live in my community and his. That member has described on this chamber's floor before heat pumps as fairy tale programs. Mr. Speaker, people who live in our communities are going to save $1,000. That's no fairy tale. Hear, hear.
Both Sean Fraser and Rick Perkins are Nova Scotian MPs.
Député de South Shore St. Margaret's.
Well, heat pumps increase the coal demanded for electricity in Nova Scotia, but NDP Liberals have brought back that rum bottle politics. Vote Liberal, get a free quart of rum, or vote and get a free heat pump. But here's the catch. Liberals promised to quadruple the carbon tax after the next election. Nova Scotians aren't fooled by this bait and switch. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. When will the Prime Minister stop with his Band-Aid and cure the problem that he caused, which is the carbon tax, and exit?
Hey, that's pretty good, Rick. Pretty good. Wasn't using his paper? He uses paper a lot.
Mr. Speaker, with great respect to my honourable colleague, I think he has missed the point of this program entirely. He's concerned that people will pay a higher price after the pause has ended and the price comes back into effect. If people install a heat pump, they won't pay it at all, and that is the point. Mr. Speaker, we are making the investments necessary so people can replace a more polluting system with a less polluting system. And since he's mentioned coal, we're working to eliminate that from the grid in Nova Scotia too, which is going to help people in both of our communities.
These guys are going toe to toe. Let's see it again.
Coast of Bays,
Let's see it again.
Notre Dame.
Thank you, Mr.
Clifford
Speaker.
Small,
Folks
Newfoundland.
back home are wondering how much tax they'll pay if they vote Liberal in the next election. The Liberal MP for Long Range suggested that they want to be a government that listens to the concerns of Liberal ridings. Her and her constant colleagues voted 24 times to increase the carbon tax to 61 cents per litre. After 8 years, this NDP Liberal government and this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Will they stop the mass confusion and tell Atlantic Canadians how much carbon tax they'll pay if they vote Liberal in the next election?
Clifford's fun to watch. He always lights it up. They can't have this continue. Like, it disrupts the flow of question period.
The Honourable Minister.
I think, Mr. Speaker, you could say it for the fifth time, and I don't think the answer would get across. The bottom line is, Mr. Speaker, we on this side of the House tried to find a way to make sure that people square affordability with wanting to fight climate change. Both are very important right now. Both are very important to people in Atlantic Canada, very important in my constituency. And I think that we have found a way to do that, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Just saying, on Friday, Seamus was pretty funny on Friday. He made some really funny jokes in his point. It was funny.
Mr. Speaker,
Statler.
homelessness is on
Waldorf
the
and
rise across
Statler
the
from the
country.
Muppets.
Sadly, this is a reality facing too many veterans who have bravely served our country. Everyone deserves to have a safe and affordable home. It is vitally important that we do everything in our power to help our homeless veterans. Can the Minister of Veterans Affairs tell us what action the government is taking on this crucial issue? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I first of all want to thank my friend and colleague for this very
She is
important
also
question.
a member of the
health and safety and
WEF,
well-being
just
of
so
our
you
veterans
know.
is my top priority. We take this situation very seriously, and that's why our government is investing in a new program to combat homelessness when it comes to veterans. This program will provide rent supplement, support services, as well as important research to really determine what the reasons why veterans are homeless. Canada's veterans have been there for our country, and Mr. Speaker, we have to be there for them, and we will. Thank you.
She just got a bowl haircut.
The Honourable Member from Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, as grocery prices continue to be sky high, 1,500 students, faculty, staff, and alumni are relying on the campus food bank every week at the University of Alberta. The demand has quadrupled over the past 2 years. The Liberals are nicely asking CEOs to lower the prices, and that obviously isn't working. The Conservatives are fine with those CEOs getting richer, while students and workers are forced to turn to food banks. Why won't the Liberals tackle corporate greed so that students and workers can afford to eat? Or does this government only believe Canadians who vote for them deserve to eat?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know that
All
at
right,
times
Ryan
when
Turnbull.
Canadians are struggling with affordability, that
A real clown.
Food prices are too high, and
Thanks.
that's what we've heard right across this country. That's why our government called the 5 largest grocery chain CEOs to Ottawa and worked with them to create action plans that they're implementing to lower and stabilize food prices for Canadians. This is important work. We're tracking their progress, and we'll have more to report soon, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Ryan didn't have his coffee today, I don't think. He
Richmond,
seemed
Athabasca.
kind of dead there.
Mr. Speaker, every time
This
we
is
ask
Alan
questions
Reyes.
about
He
the
dropped
government
a scandal
general's
bomb 2
indecent
weeks ago. It was
spending,
wild.
the government gets a little offended. They pay lip service, but nothing is done to change the culture of this institution. The Governor-General spends thousands on meals, alcoholic beverages, luxury hotels, trips, cleaning services, just to name a few. Imagine on a single plane trip, she even spent nearly $1,000 on slices of lime and lemon. You couldn't make this up. So I repeat my question to the government. Does the government intend to cut its $33 million budget because clearly it doesn't seem to be able to manage taxpayers' money seriously and responsibly?
It's pretty great.
The Honourable Minister.
That's an interesting story.
The Governor-General does important work for Canada here and throughout the world. And of course, we expect all public office holders to spend every dollar with respect, with rigour, and in a conscientious way, respecting all Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Last time he shut down the House with his last question.
Unfortunately,
it happened again.
Concludes and brings us to the end of our question period.
This is so wild, guys. That's two times in a row
that we have
that Alan Reyes dropped the bomb.
The member for Regina Capel has the floor.
And they shut it down right afterwards. Like, it's just really funny. I'm going to have to do some investigating. We've got some more things to do this evening, I guess. So that's fun. Anyhow, this is Question Period Canada. It's fun here. Politics in Canada is heating up. Times are so tough, of course they're going to. It might seem like I'm pulling really hard for the Conservatives. That's not really it. I just think that it's time for change in the world. Like, I voted Liberal in 2015. Like, it's not that. It's just that times are bad, and I don't like the plans that are out there right now, so I'm paying attention to this. And the Conservatives are more entertaining to watch most of the time because they're the heel. They're the opposition, right? Anyways, guys, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you very much. Like and subscribe. We're making videos all the time. I make shorts. I make shorter videos. It's just for fun, having a good time with Canadian politics and learning as we go. So that's it. We're going to get going. We'll catch you next time. We'll be back tomorrow. And that's it for now. We're out tonight. Have a good one. We'll see you next time.